right, welcome back, everyone. So just a few days away, we're going to start our special feature I've been telling you all about on the Constitution and the attacks on the Constitution. Really, I think this is a necessary documentary, especially with July 4th just around the corner, coming up soon. I think it's an important one, folks, because a lot of America's history is being rewritten right now. And not just the history of this country, but even the context of what the Founding Fathers did. If this history is lost, this documentary kind of explores what that means. We also go a lot into, the thinking, I'd say, behind why we're a constitutional republic and not just a democracy. You hear a lot of people say America is a democracy and something a threat against our democracy. We're not a democracy, folks. We never have been. And if the Founding Fathers, if the dreams of them comes true, we never will be a democracy. In fact, they viewed democracy as being basically one step away from aristocracy. The documentary explains this. We actually go pretty in-depth into this. We talk about a lot of other issues. I think you'll really enjoy it. It's going to be exclusive on Epoch TV on July 6th, so just a few days away. So be sure to check that out. Also, folks, few of you asking, from here out, at least for now, we're going to have the full Q&As on YouTube. And so, I really apologize to you folks on Epoch TV. There's been some technical issues, and I apologize for that on the lives. Basically, we're just working on the capacity. A lot of you folks there, and we really appreciate it. But we have to make our systems a bit stronger for that, and so we're working on it. It should be done soon, but after that, we'll find a solution that works better for everyone. And so, folks, you've been listening to your feedback and do appreciate it, and so hope you like what we have going forward. That said, folks, we do have the live Q&A. We do have the interviews and also the special features coming up on Epoch TV. And again, this is one of the Constitution I've been working on quite a lot for quite a while. And I really hope you enjoy it. You might have seen me on the road quite a bit lately. That was part of the reason. The other part of that hopefully will be revealed soon, and hopefully much more to come after that as well. All right, folks, that said, some real big stuff's going on right now. It was one of those days, to be honest, where I was going through the news, and sometimes you're kind of like, there's not that many big stories. Today, it was one of those days where, honestly, there were so many big stories that it was kind of hard to choose. There's a lot going on right now, a whole lot going on, and the context of all these things is not easy sometimes to see on the surface. The biggest thing going on right now, I'd say, is the Chinese Communist Party celebrating its 100 years. And this is important because this is the CCP not just celebrating its 100 years, but in their eyes, celebrating the victory of the communist system, especially as they view their system having prevailed in a lot of ways over the Western systems. They view right now as we speak, the U.S., the U.S. system of liberty, let's say, basically being on the decline. They view themselves as having come out on top in a lot of ways due to this pandemic, but at the same time, it's actually very complicated because globally they've gained a lot of influence, but internally, they're actually having a lot of problems. I'll be explaining this and what it means, and also what it means for the world, not just for the Chinese people. There's some pretty serious stuff involved with this, and so I'll go pretty in-depth into this tonight. Also going to go into a few other stories, folks, a lot coming up. Around the half-hour mark, again, we'll always go into questions. So if you have questions, do please leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. And that said, folks, it's wonderful seeing you all here. And happy pre-July 4th. We can celebrate it twice. All right, and folks, yeah, good to see you all here. Thank you. Don Hartley said, good evening, Josh, from Northwest Pennsylvania. Thanks for being here. Grace Asher, hey, good people. Good seeing you here. Yeah, Freya. Hi, Josh. Good to see you. Thank you. Everyone, thank you for being here. All right, that says, jump into the first story for the night. I want to go in depth into this one. So the Epoch Times, the editorial board, published a pretty long story about, I'd say, the deeper meaning behind what's happening with the Chinese Communist Party celebrating 100 years since the founding of the party. And let's go into this now. We'll go into it, explain a bit of it. Start now. So it says here, the Chinese Communist Party has destroyed the best part of China, the best of China. It says the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, has taken strict precautions in its preparations to mark its 100th anniversary. Beijing is heavily guarded. Knife stores are required to ask for ID, and report customers' information to the police. You can't get guns there, so knives are the next one. Restaurants in restricted areas have been forced to close their doors. The CCP is arresting people going to Beijing and blocking any social media account that might not show enough self-censorship. This is where you start seeing the social credit system come into play, where they can deem which people are the loyal CCP followers and which ones may not like it, or which ones believe in ideas that the CCP does not want them to be believing in. It says the CCP might look strong outside, but in reality, it is extremely nervous, right? It has security, checking people's IDs for knives, not letting people into Beijing, into the main city, if their social media accounts have things the CCP doesn't like. This is not a symbol of strength, folks. This is a symbol of weakness. It means they're afraid of something. As Epoch Times reports, despite decades of tight control and brainwashing, the Chinese people are well aware that the communist system is against human nature and will not last long. Now, since its takeover of China, the CCP has killed an estimated 80 million Chinese people. That's 50 to 70 million just under Mao Zedong alone, up to 80 million currently, some say even higher. Now, during its existence, it has never stopped its campaigns to purge different groups, every time picking a new group to target. Its primary targets have been those representing the best of the Chinese people and their culture. And you see this under a lot of communist systems. They typically go after the best of the society, tear them down, destroy them, and then move on to another group later. Now, many of its victims are the most well-educated and the most successful in the Chinese society. Often those who imparted the best of Chinese culture handed down to them through a long family history. Now, the Chinese people have a long history of being loyal to their family and their spouses. They call it filial piety. When CCP officials reached the cities, they divorced their wives and married city girls. The Chinese also had a long history of respecting and supporting those who lived in temples, but the CCP forced monks to marry. All communist countries have experienced famine. It's an inevitable result of the communist system. In China, the Great Famine from 1958 to 1962, that alone is estimated to have killed 40 million people. In thousands of cases, people were driven to insanity and turned to cannibalism. There's one such story that's widely known in China. A father had 2 children, a boy and a girl. A boy and a girl, right? They were the only ones left in their farmhouse. One day, the father drove his daughter out of the house, and when the girl came back, her brother disappeared. There was a layer of white foam floating in the wok where they cooked their food, and a bone had been thrown by the stove. A few days later, the father added water to the wok and asked his daughter to come over. The daughter was so scared that she hid behind the door, crying and begging, "Dad, don't eat me. I will tend the grass and keep the fire for you. If you eat me, no one will work for you." This is a well-known story in China, under the famine under Mao Zedong. Now, China has a history of 5,000 years. A lot of people, unfortunately, understand Chinese history just within the context of the Chinese Communist Party and maybe the Warring States period, but 5,000 years of culture, 5,000 years of history. Now, and for most of the time, China was the envy of surrounding countries. The people were civilized and led stylish lives. Even kings from other countries chose to stay and even die in China. Communism, however, has brought famine, poverty, and an endless war against the Chinese people. If there's any example of what communism does to a country, the communism can even destroy the best of people. China is the best example of this. Looking what the Chinese Communist Party has done there is the best example you can see of this. The Chinese people have a tradition of being extremely respectful towards the elderly, showing respect to their parents, grandparents, and teachers. Here's one old saying. It says, "One day my teacher, lifelong my father." It's an old Chinese saying. "And he who teaches me for the day is my father for life." However, in the 1960s, during the Cultural Revolution, teenagers were encouraged by communist officials to beat their parents and teachers. In Beijing alone, more than 1,000 teachers were beaten to death by their students. As a young man, Bo Xilai, the future mayor of the super city Chongqing, would go on to visit the United States as a high-ranking official, stomped on his father's chest, breaking several of his ribs. This kind of act was unheard of during China's 5,000 years of history. The CCP used teenagers to search civilians' homes and destroy antiques, artworks, and traditional objects they found, as well as public works, temples, and so on. Sound familiar, folks? Right? What's happening in the United States, what's happening in the world right now is not new. What's happening has been repeated under every communist system that's taken power. There's a living example of this happening right now. Chinese Communist Party. The little red guard, the individuals we're talking about right now, the ones who smashed the temples, the ones who tore down the statues, the ones who destroyed cultural relics. I mean, in ancient China, traditional China, even before the CCP, they said you couldn't dig 10 feet underground without finding a cultural relic. That's how deep their culture went. That's how common it was to have cultural relics. They destroyed all of those. It was promoted as vogue by the communist government to do this. Does that sound familiar, folks? The destroying of your past, the tearing down of your statues, the ruining of your culture, the demonizing of your founding fathers. Does it sound familiar? China is a perfect example of this and a perfect example of where that leads. Now, in China, anything that could remind people of traditional culture was destroyed. That's what they were doing. Anything that could serve as a reminder of the memory they were destroying was destroyed. In fact, this is not just China. Ryszard Legutko wrote in his book, Demon and Democracy, talking about what happened in Eastern Europe. The very same thing happened, Poland. And in Poland, same thing. He said it was a war against memory. The communists were waging a war against memory. You remember your history. You remember what you were taught. You remember the values you were taught. All of that was attacked. All of that was torn down by these groups. And you were told that everything you believed, everything you thought previously was false. Now, what do you call that? You call that re-education, right? You call that re-education. That's part of the ideological revolution. Now, the Chinese culture was always believed to be divinely inspired, but communist ideology is against humanity and against human nature. Anything that represents traditional culture and principles is an obstacle to enforcing its ideology. It cannot exist as long as these values exist. And after using teenagers to destroy traditional objects and overthrow political opponents, the CCP sent those same teenagers to the remote countryside to get educated. Once it no longer needed them, it threw them out. Mao Zedong did that to the little red guards. Again, the equivalent of Antifa for the Chinese Communist Party. It threw them out, didn't need them anymore. Now, doing so prevented a potential revolution demands from them for employment. Sound familiar, folks, again? Mao Zedong got rid of the little red guards because they might want something after he was done using them. They helped him tear down traditional Chinese culture. They helped him destroy their relics. They helped him tear down statues. Once he was done with them, he no longer needed people to tear down the past. He no longer needed people who were anti-government. He needed stability. Now, does that sound familiar, right? What's happened with BLM? What's happened with Antifa? You see these same individuals now revolting against the current government, the same people who supported them previously. What's happening now to them, right? Now, in China, these young people faced many years of pain and hopelessness. The CCP also shut down universities and sent intellectuals to the countryside to do farm work for re-education, much like the Khmer Rouge did in Cambodia, actually. Now, many musicians had their hands ruined by hard labor. Countless writers, artists, professors, engineers, scientists, leading experts, and cultural elites, the people who traditionally carry a country's knowledge, skills, and cultural spirit, committed suicide. And worst of all, when the CCP came to power, it outlawed religion, dismissing it as the opium of the people. And now, why do they do this, folks? It's because if you want to destroy what a country was, if you want to wipe out its culture, if you want to wipe out its history, you need to destroy anybody who would recognize or would inform people what history once was, what the country once was, and what values once were. If those things still stand, then those who need to wipe out those systems can never attain power. If people still believe in God, if people believe in religion, they recognize a power higher than government. And most of all, they recognize a moral standard outside the control of government. This is what the CCP did, and this is what's happening right now in many parts of the world. Now, in China, it used atheism to destroy people's faith in God, taking away people's beliefs and moral standards. The most severe religious persecution campaign by the CCP right now targets Falun Gong practitioners. In terms of its persecution, the scale of this, the severity of it, it is unprecedented, targeting 100 million practitioners of the spiritual discipline, as well as their families and friends. Falun Gong teaches traditional meditation, which has been a core part of Chinese tradition since ancient times, and the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Now, to carry out the persecution, which is now entering the 23rd year against people who literally believe in truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, who are trying to be good people. CCP leader Jiang Zemin promoted anyone who supported this persecution, forcing people to oppose truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Do you know what they call it in China, folks? When you go along with government programs to forcibly destroy targeted groups, when the government tells you one day that this group is your enemy, and if you don't destroy them, you are what? You know what they say? They say you are not politically correct. That term comes from 1967 Mao Zedong during the Cultural Revolution. Political correctness is a government-led moral system. And adherence to that means you are following government morals rather than traditional morals. It means you are going against what you feel in your heart and what you know to be true. And you are following instead this new moral system promoted to you by state power. Those who went along with it were called politically correct. Those who went against it were called not politically correct. And as we see these things happening right now, those who carry out the persecutions of the Communist Party are considered politically correct. Now, in the West, it hasn't come this far yet. In some countries it has, previously under the Soviets. But folks, we're seeing the seeds of this sown now, right? Now, in China, under this persecution and promoting people who opposed goodness, the CCP placed those who are most capable of committing evil in the top positions in Chinese society. This is how they choose their elites. They do not have a system of elections like we do. Kind of do, but not really. People are placed there based on basically adherence to social justice, right? They're placed there based on adherence to social programs, which means the most evil, most rotten, most corrupt people are the ones who achieve power in that society. Now, the forced organ harvesting from Falun Gong practitioners, which many of you have heard about, whereby individuals are killed for their organs to be sold for profit, has been supported and carried out by the military, police, courts, hospitals, and the prison system. And as a result, the entire country has become morally bankrupt because the systems of justice are carrying out one of the greatest injustices the world may have ever witnessed. Now, once the CCP began to profit from killing Falun Gong practitioners for their organs, it could not stop its business of killing for profit. That was the start of it, folks, and it spread from there. It has continued this practice in Xinjiang province now against the Muslim Uyghurs. And the destruction of Chinese traditions, the damage to the moral standard, and the persecution of people of faith have been the biggest crimes of the CCP. The Chinese Communist Party, it has killed more people in China than the number who died in the 2 world wars combined, more than World War I and World War II combined, killed by the CCP just against its own people. Now, beyond killing, it has made every effort to destroy the spirit, the culture, and the dignity of the Chinese people, fully aware that it is the enemy of the people, that it is the enemy of the Chinese people. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has always been in an existential crisis. This is why it needs to lock down the cities. This is why when top CCP leaders speak of anniversary events, they always try to make strong appeals and appeal like they represent the Chinese people. This is why they need to check IDs if you want to buy a knife. This is why they need to track everybody's social media accounts. This is why they fear what people may be saying online against the party, because they are afraid, because they know the crimes they've committed. And they know that if the Chinese people wake up to what has happened, that is the end of the CCP. And actually, the Chinese Communist Party has taken the Chinese people hostage for fear that they will rise up and overthrow it. And so, folks, as you watch the Chinese Communist Party do what it's doing right now, as you watch what's happening, know this history and know why it's doing it. It is not an act of strength. It's an act of fear. And folks, that said, we've been talking about this for a while. We're going to go into a lot more on this. Now, a lot of other stories to go into tonight, folks, but I wanted to start with that one. It's from the editorial board of the Epoch Times and also some of my own analysis for y'all. But here in the United States, folks, we see the buddings, we see the brewing start of some of these same programs. But in the United States, much of this is being done not by government to an extent, but by big tech and big corporations that ironically work very closely with the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP has been promoting this system of government. They call it the China model. The CCP is trying to use the technologies of foreign countries to push these things. And here now we see some examples of things that look a whole lot like what happens in China, beginning in the United States. Another story here, folks. It says Facebook now sending warnings to users about potentially extremist friends. And I'll get into the context of this historically in just a bit. But it says here, Facebook users have recently reported being sent warning messages from the social media giant relating to extremists or extremist content. And it says here, this is what it says. It says, are you concerned that someone you know is becoming an extremist? That's one message by Facebook. Another message says, we care about preventing extremism on Facebook. Others in your situation have received confidential support. It adds that before offering the button to get support, which leads to another Facebook page about extremism. Now, Red State editor Kira Davis, who said he was sent a screenshot of the message from a friend, wrote this. He said, hey, has anyone had this message pop up on their Facebook? My friend, who is not an ideologue but hosts lots of competing chatter, got this message twice. He's very disturbed. And others reported getting a warning that they have often been exposed to harmful extremist content recently. Facebook might be alerting you folks if they believe that you have been exposed of extremist content, not to mention if your friends believe you've been exposed to anything they call extremist. Now, it says here, the message then states that, quote, violent groups try to manipulate your anger and disappointment. Now, I would assume they're talking about groups that may have, for example, burned down communities and killed people and started Chaz sites where they wanted to create autonomous zones in different cities and push people out of their homes and took over police departments and seized their firearms and gave them out on the streets like they did in Portland and Seattle. Maybe. Or maybe folks are talking about something else, and I really think it might be the latter. Now, it says similarly, they're offering a get support option. Facebook randomly sent me this notice about extremism. This is one statement. One person said this. Facebook randomly sent me this notice about extremism when I clicked over the top of the app, over the app. And he said, pretty weird. The get support button, right? The get support button just goes to a short article asking people not to be hateful. That's what one user wrote on Twitter. A Facebook spokesperson also confirmed to CNN on Thursday, that's today, that the social media giant is currently running the warning as a test, meaning the beginning of something, folks. Now, this ties into a broader phenomenon happening right now, that the context of it, let's go back to it, right? When the Democrats were, of course, in the election, one of the main things they said was they needed to undo the Trump phenomena. They needed to undo what Trump did to America. They needed to change this movement to get rid of it. This idea of making America great again, this idea of opposing globalism, this idea of standing up against, let's say, the border, what's happening at the border, open borders, this idea of believing in your country and believing in your flag and believing in your constitution and believing in the values you were raised with. All of these things were what reemerged in the last 4 years, and all of these things now are being seen and framed as forms of extremism. The language itself has been altered. And this is what we're facing. Now, I mentioned previously that the definition of racism has even been changed. And so when they call you a racist, when they say this or that is racist, they're actually not talking about the racism that you or I were raised with understanding. Racism, as it used to be defined, and you can do an experiment, folks. I encourage all of you. Pull up a dictionary, a Webster's dictionary that's at least 10 years old, and read the definition of racism. You can even go online. If you go to Wayback Machine or archive.is, find the definition of racism on, let's say, Merriam-Webster dictionary, and type in a link. It'll show you the old definition. The old definition stated that racism is discrimination against a person based on their race or ethnicity, right? Discriminating against a person based just on their race or ethnicity. The new racism, the new definition of it has actually removed that. They no longer consider that racism. Why is that? Maybe it's because the things they're pushing would technically be defined as racism under the traditional definition of racism, under the real definition of racism. because if discriminating against white people is discrimination, discriminating against white people or hating people because of their white skin is racist, according to the real definition of it. But folks, they changed the definition. If you read the dictionary now, you'll find that they've changed it. The new definition states that racism ties to socio-economic conditions that lead to unequal outcomes based on race. In other words, folks, under the new definition of racism, a socio-economic system that leads to unequal outcomes, i.e. not equity, is racist. And what does that mean? Anything other than socialism is racist. That is what the new definition of it entails. And when they call you racist, what they really mean is that you do not support their socialist agenda, because they've redefined the word. It no longer means what it used to mean. And on that note, folks, too, there's an old joke. It was by one of the former presidents. I can't remember which one, actually. I want to say it was, I can't remember. I won't say it because I don't remember who it was, but I'll tell you the joke. Now, folks, if you have a dog and you call a tail a leg, how many legs does the dog have? The dog has 4 legs still, because calling a tail a leg does not make it a leg. Redefining language does not change the meaning of language. Telling people something means something it doesn't does not change the fact that it means what it used to mean. You can't alter language and pretend it means something new. It still means what it used to mean, folks. And they are promoting racism, they are promoting hatred, they are promoting discrimination under the banner of opposing these things. Because, folks, the very definition of these things is different now. They are embodying what they claim to oppose and using that as tools to launch their own campaigns. This new socialism, right? Being promoted under these ideas. Equity. That's the key word they're using for it. This is what they're doing, folks. Now, on this note, folks, with Facebook, you might notice you can't find me on Facebook anymore. It's because I deleted it a few months back. And now they're doing this. I'm glad I did. Let's put it that way. Yeah, Elizabeth Weddy said it's like calling a mother a birthing person. Yeah, I've seen that. Oh, man. George Orwell warned about this. Newspeak, redefining the language, rewriting language. Yeah. Ampleford, he said doublethink. He also talked about doublethink, when you can hold 2 contradictory ideas and not see the contradictions within it. You can believe 2 things that contradict each other. You can think that being racist is bad, but despising a person based on the color of their skin is good when it supports your socioeconomic goals. These are contradictory ideas, folks. Being racism does not, right? Opposing racism and supporting racism they don't work together. So how can they push ideas like critical race theory that discriminate literally against people based on their race and encourage hatred of people based on their race under the narrative of opposing racism? The funny thing is, though, really, this goes against the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act does still recognize the traditional definition of racism. And by that definition, folks, not only are they using racism, but they're even possibly violating both the Civil Rights Act and maybe even the 14th Amendment in some cases if they're engaging in discrimination. Keep that in mind. Now, folks, a lot we could talk about and a lot to go into still. I have a lot of stories lined up, but that says, let's jump into some questions for the night. First, I want to show you a quick preview of what we've been working on. I've been mentioning, folks, there's a lot going on here. I've been very busy. You might have been seeing me traveling around quite a bit. There's a reason for that. I've been working on something big for you all. We'll show you a quick trailer of what we've been working on now. The American story was once seen as a light of strength and freedom for the world. It created a government by the people and for the people, where rights were given not by leaders, but by God. Yet now the very fabric of the nation is under assault.
Without us, I don't think you'd have free market capitalism. I can't think where it exists in its essence anywhere else.
I think the American idea is forward-looking, it's optimistic, it's the idea that children will live better than their parents.
The Constitution mostly is a guarantee of what government cannot do. If we lose the Constitution, we lose our liberty, we lose our prosperity, we lose our way of life, and the world loses because the world has been depending on us for a half century.
So every tyrant in America right now, from the radical left to the globalists to big tech to the Communist Party of China, are all trying to destroy the US Constitution. Because if they can do that, they have complete power over every aspect of our lives. That's their dream, and that's our nightmare.
What is the real story of America? Why did the Founding Fathers choose a republic over a democracy? And what would the world be if the bedrock of the American Constitution was lost? All right, folks. Again, that's exclusively on epochtv.com/crossroads. It'll premiere on July 6th. And one of the reasons I've been traveling so much lately, some is for speaking events and so on, and interviews and so on, but working on some other big stuff as well, folks. That's one of the big ones. A lot more to announce soon, hopefully, as well. But, folks, I really hope you enjoyed that one. Really, with that special feature coming out, we really tried to present a lot of the ideas that have been warped, let's say, about the United States, our history, what we are as a nation, what we represent to the world, and a lot of our history that's been, well, frankly, rewritten. Hence the name America Rewritten. Again, July 6th, that premieres, folks, and I really hope you enjoy it. That'll be at epochtv.com/crossroads. And again, folks, really appreciate you if you're supporting us at Epoch TV. Appreciate you all in general. But again, we've created our new platform, Epoch TV, EPOCHTV.com, as a way to get around the censorship that's been placed on us and others, frankly. And we're going to be growing that quite a bit. We have a lot of programs coming on right now. And we're also going to be producing a lot more like what you just saw. And hopefully you'll enjoy once you see the full thing. All right, that said, folks, let's jump into some questions for the night. Now, this is from Jay Tay. You said, why does anyone in the U.S. or anywhere in the world do business with the CCP when they commit so many crimes against humanity? Yeah, well, I would ask the same thing, frankly. I would say, frankly, there's some people who, frankly, put money and profit above that. And you see a lot of big businesses, frankly, doing that right now. Nike's a great example of this. I don't like to usually call people up by names, but Nike's a great example of this. Frankly, the NBA is a great example of this. Frankly, a lot of these big organizations that are doing business in China right now, almost the entire garment industry, most of the motor industry, are great examples of this. Because, folks, they know they're using slave labor. They know that the people producing their products are slaves, many times political slaves, sometimes ethnic slaves. While at the same time they come here and they promote to us these different narratives claiming that America's history of slavery is somehow something that means it should be destroyed. You should be clear, folks, this is just a narrative meant to tear down America while tolerating these practices as they happen in current times, right now as we speak in China, which these companies are engaging in. They are not only lying to you, they're not only trying to turn you against your own history, but they are practicing the very thing that they're trying to use as an excuse and the reason for tearing down your history. These big corporations, these oligarchs, which is what they are. And ironically, this is the irony we get into with these political labels. If you go back and read, for example, F.A. Hayek, Road to Serfdom, if you go back and read some of the ironically classical liberals, Frederick Bastiat was a classical liberal. If you go back and read Ludwig von Mises, his book Socialism, highly recommended if you haven't read it. Mises notes that oftentimes when people criticize capitalism, they're not even criticizing capitalism. They're criticizing these socialist interventionist policies that have been gradually adopted into capitalism. They're not criticizing the systems that once were. They're criticizing the breakdown of the systems that it was caused by programs from socialism that have been introduced into our system going back to the late 1800s. This is not a new battle. This is the fruition of a very long battle that you're watching. And frankly, these corporate oligarchs, and that is what they are, who believe that they should have this, let's say, large-scale control and believe they can use narratives, whether for profit or for their own political goals or for whatever other reason, find that it's okay to practice slavery, to use slaves, to engage with a system, a government like the Chinese Communist Party, that has no qualms with doing so. And they will even censor themselves if they try to criticize it, or one person in the company criticizes it, right? LeBron James, for example, that whole fiasco. People who will defend the CCP and apologize for these types of things. This is the reality. These businesses, I would argue, most of them don't actually care about the things they claim to care about. When they try to stuff down your throat narratives about opposing America and its history, you should remember, folks, many of these same corporations are engaging in the very thing they're criticizing: slavery, as we speak. Not only slavery, but re-education through labor. Not only slavery, but live organ harvesting. A country, they are tolerating that, and they are silencing themselves as they practice this business. The Chinese Communist Party even lobbies our government through the medium of these businesses. They engage in intellectual property theft through the medium of these businesses. As we discussed in our last episode, many of these businesses have members of the Chinese Communist Party within their own boards of directors. There was a recent report from the US government on this. I think it was a Republican report talking about this. And as folks, ironically, the far left now likes to play with these, mostly Democrat Socialists of America and others, like to play with these narratives of opposing the oligarchy. Folks, where does the oligarchy, quote unquote, stand on all this? Last time I checked, all these big corporations, all these big tech oligarchs tend to support these socialist systems. I think it's time people started questioning why that is, right? This is from L.A. Rose. You said, Joshua, this Facebook extremist report request reminds me of McCarthyism. Yeah, it does. And the Hollywood blacklist era. Why do you think there are so many instances of free speech infringement recently? Thanks. Well, we're in a concerning time in America because, I'll get into it. We have a very interesting system in America, a very unique system for the world, I'd say. If you want to institute socialism in America, it's not easy. And why is that? You can get a socialist into power. You could get a socialist to the seat of the US president, and you could not establish socialism in America. America is not such a simple country. We are a very unique country in terms of looking at the world. We have separation of powers. If you wanted to control this country and create socialism, you would first of all have to get control of all three branches of government. You need to pack the courts, control the judiciary, you need to control the state Senate, or you need to control the Senate and the House, and you need to control the executive branch, the presidential seat, just to control the federal government to an extent. But what makes America very unique is actually the state rights issue, and also the divisions of powers, even down to the enforcement of laws with the sheriffs. Right now, folks, you have sheriffs who, in America, said that they will not support or enforce. They will not enforce gun grab laws. You have the majority of counties in America where the sheriffs have already stated this. The majority have already stated this. The majority of counties are gun sanctuary counties in the United States. This is sheriffs not acting on local law. This is sheriffs saying, as elected officials, saying that people, as someone, because they swear to uphold the Constitution and protect the Constitution, they will not enforce things that they view as non-constitutional, things that do not align with the Constitution. The American Constitution represents something very unique. And the American idea also represents something very unique for the world. The American Constitution is, interestingly, and we go over this in the documentary we're going to be showing you soon, but the American Constitution is really like, this gets into our system of government. We're a representative democracy, a republic, i.e., not a democracy, and namely a constitutional republic, meaning mob rule, even if you control everything in the country, even if you control the courts, even if you control the presidential office, if you control everything, you cannot get rid of the Constitution. You cannot get rid of the values, the rights that are protected under it, right? And the idea of the American system is something very unique. right? It reinterpreted the very idea of where power in a society comes from. It states, right, in the Declaration of Independence, that government is instituted among men to protect God-given rights, right? That people are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these, not all of them, but among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And people institute government among men to protect those rights. The purpose of government is not to decide your freedoms. The purpose of government is to protect your God-given freedoms. The very idea that America represents is the biggest thorn in the side of every totalitarian system that exists in this world. And frankly, it's the thing that's stopping many of these powers from doing what they would like to do. To establish the types of powers that they would dream of, they need to get rid of the Constitution. That's very difficult. So America is a very unique system. Now, on the note of where Facebook and big tech comes into this, well, I'd say that people who wish to establish that type of system in America have found a unique loophole, which is private businesses are typically able to violate your constitutional rights. Private businesses don't have to support all religions, technically. Private businesses don't have to support all viewpoints, technically. They can choose. They can have an exclusive business. You can have a Christian school that serves Christians. You can have a Muslim school that serves Muslims. You can have a temple that serves one religion or another. They do not all have to be because, requirements on equality and stuff like this, or, requirements of free speech and things against discrimination. It does not often apply to the business level. Businesses, newspapers don't have to report everything. They don't have to run op-eds from any politician no matter what. They have a choice of whether they publish them or not, right? They found this loophole, folks, in the private business sector, that government can use business to enforce totalitarian law. That, frankly, big tech and social media and these things can basically become the arbiters of free speech. They can be the ones who determine what you can or cannot say. The banks can cancel your finances. They can cancel your accounts. They've done this. Video platforms such as Facebook can demonetize your videos, right, if they don't like what you're saying. They found that they can shut down basically arguments they don't like. They can carry out the types of censorship you have in China while using private businesses. And unfortunately, they have big tech, social media, has the protection of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which gives them a legal framework to do so. Basically meaning that because they allegedly, originally it was framed, they have it now, but allegedly because they don't have the ability to monitor and censor or monitor all content and moderate it, that they can't be held responsible for what people might publish. They're a platform where people publish stuff, not a publisher themselves. They've changed from that, but they've maintained that protection. And at the same time, folks, they use that protection as a vehicle to carry out censorship because it gives them legal protection. And this is really, I think, where things are heading, one of the concerning directions of it. I think we oftentimes misinterpret socialism, frankly. We oftentimes misinterpret socialism as being just an economic system, when it never was. If you go back to the time of Marx, it was specifically a metaphysical idea. It was about metaphysics. It was a theory on the existence and purpose of life. And classical writers talked about this. You had many forms of socialism, not just economic socialism. You had cultural Marxism, like under the Frankfurt School. You had the technocrats, technocracy, like what we see right now with big tech. This was one of the ways that they knew and stated early in the 1930s that they believed they could enforce totalitarian policies. There are many things like this. Syndicalism, for example, many others. They take different names, and folks, we oftentimes don't recognize all these systems because I'd say there's no way of knowing it unless you do a whole lot of reading, frankly. The ability to even be exposed to this information is being denied to a lot of people. Next question here is Truly Right View. He said, how do you think Trump coming to Texas border will change the Biden administration? made Kamala Harris go there before he did. That was one thing. Well, it's going to be interesting to watch. Oh, by the way, the drink tonight is good old-fashioned British black tea with a bit of honey. Going for the classic tonight. Now, in terms of how Trump's visiting the southern border will affect the Biden's administration's policies, well, it's going to be interesting. Now, this is where the other big power that makes America unique comes into play, folks, which is the fourth estate, which is the media. Now, most of the fourth estate is controlled, ironically, by about 6 corporations, which act pretty much as puppets of big government, right? Technically, most of the legacy news outlets are part of that whole puppet system. But you do have independent media, and glad to have you all here. But folks, you also have individuals who are able to have influence on a social level. You know, social media in reality is a type of media, social media. In fact, this is one of the areas I'm surprised no government has ever challenged this type of censorship on. In America, we do have the right of the free press, folks. And if you're calling yourself social media, a media, and citizen media, and these types of things, then having a platform, whether it be YouTube, whether it be Facebook, whether it be other areas, having a platform through which you can relay news and report news is media, right? Social media. Trump, in reality, became a social media influencer, and that social media influence allowed him to win the seat of the presidency. Now, when it comes to, again, the fourth estate being media, one thing that this relates to is, let's say, people being able to criticize the government and hold the government accountable. Now, funny thing, folks, as we go through this talk of extremism and these types of things, you know, seditious speech in America is actually constitutionally protected. We can go back to John Adams. And I talk about this in my documentary, spoiler alert. But we can go back to John Adams, folks. When John Adams passed the Aliens and Sedition Act, it was Thomas Jefferson who overthrew that. The Aliens and Sedition Act made it illegal in the United States in the early days of the founding of this country. It made it illegal to criticize or spread disinformation about the federal government. Thomas Jefferson argued it was unconstitutional, was very much against it. He won because of that policy, and he overturned it as soon as he came into office. Judges later at the Supreme Court determined over the years that the Aliens and Sedition Act was unconstitutional. You are allowed in the United States to criticize your government. You're allowed in the United States to even make seditious speech against the government. This is constitutionally protected, going back to the founding of this country, folks. And ironically, even communism, people who believe in communism, all believe in the forceful overthrow of government, frankly. Because what did Marx talk about? He talked about the forceful overthrow of government. If you're a communist, you believe in sedition, right? Now, back to the point on the border, though. One of the powers, right? I'm just explaining the extent of the ability of free speech, right? The ability of free speech that people are given in this country. Now, they've changed some of this because of the influence of social media and the control of social media, the private businesses being able to censor on behalf of government, right? The medium of private business acting at the behest of government censors, enforcing these policies through ways that use the private systems. When it comes to Trump, Trump was a social media influencer, and Trump still commands a lot of power in this country. I would say, actually, the reason they probably deleted his Facebook account and so his YouTube account and his Twitter account was because they knew he would still command a lot of influence in this country. Trump, had that not happened, would have probably been recognized by people who supported him as kind of the government in exile. And if he had that platform, he would be acting in that capacity. Trump still does, to an extent, act in that capacity. And this is why I believe his going to the southern border is so important. Trump right now is really laying out what are going to be the issues for 2022 when the House and Senate are up for re-election, while stating publicly that he intends to help Republicans win back the control of at least the House, if not both the House and the Senate. Yeah, Philipp and Eddie, you know, wish I could super chat, Josh. I wish you could super chat too. YouTube deleted that ability for y'all here. Let's call it the YouTube Pulitzer, right? Call it the YouTube Pulitzer. When they remove your ability to have ads or super chat, right? Probably means you're doing something right. but it does make it easier, of course, to communicate on here. When Trump really went to the southern border, what he did, folks, was he brought that into public view. He brought public attention to the failing policies that are in place there. This is what traditional media does. You can shine a light on areas where the government policies have failed. And by shining a light on that, you create social pressure against government policy. Trump did that, right? By doing that, he made Kamala Harris, who, when she was asked, or, she's the border czar, it's her job. Biden appointed her as the border czar, it's her job. When she was asked by journalists if she'd gone yet to the southern border, she said no, she didn't. But she also said, I haven't been to Europe either. But what does Europe have to do with the southern border, right? What happens after she shows no intention of going there? Trump announces he's going to the southern border. She's there really quick, right before he gets there. Because, folks, this is a narrative battle. Now, Trump is bringing these things into light. The things that he's bringing into light are going to become the topics of debate, and the things that the Democrats under Biden do not repair or do not, do not roll back a little bit in terms of not making too bad that it would drive away people who may vote for him. They need to consider these things leading into 2022, because if they continue doing what they're doing, if they continue with this open border policy, which is really what it is, right? They continue with this policy where they pretend to enforce these things, but don't really enforce these things, right? If they pretend that, they want to stop the border flow, but they're going around Latin America and saying, hey, free money, hey, free healthcare, hey, we support open borders, and hey, if anyone criticizes you, they're a racist and we'll deplatform them. Well, they're giving them a whole lot of reason to come here. This really, what it is, open border policy has been disastrous. It's a human rights crisis. You have crime, you have farmers getting their houses raided, you have robberies, you have murders, you have human trafficking, you have women getting themselves sold into sex slavery to send their young children over the border with these traffickers. There's terrible things going on. Things that many of these people would claim to oppose, but is happening without any kind of scrutiny. Again, because of the lack of a platform, but Trump just shined a light on it. And by shining a light on it, he's going to make them very likely either have to fix it or have this be one of the issues whereby they might actually lose a whole lot of votes in 2022. That's the significance of it. All right, folks, that said, let's jump into a few more stories for the night. It's getting a bit late, and so let's go over a few more. I want to talk about what's happening with the NSA. Speaking of all these things we're going into. Now, you might have seen recently this very strange story. It was on Tucker Carlson, where Tucker Carlson came out and said that the NSA was spying on the communications of him and his team, and that the NSA was intending to release the communications of him and his team in an attempt to get them deplatformed. Meaning, folks, one of the major intelligence agencies in the United States, which has been given Stasi-level powers, actually far beyond Stasi-level powers, far beyond anything George Orwell could have imagined. Stasi, of course, being the secret police in East Germany, right? Kind of the example of monitoring and spying on your citizens. The powers that have been given to many of our agencies is above and beyond all of that. There are some restrictions, though, to prevent them from spying on the American people. Although, I should note, there are loopholes within that, many of which came to light during the Crossfire hurricane investigations, namely when the FBI and other organizations were spying on Trump and his team. I won't get into that whole thing tonight, but that's a big story also. Now, the NSA is being accused of using this not against a sitting president, but against a journalist, Tucker Carlson. Now, let's go over the story here. It says, McCarthy calls for probe into NSA after Tucker Carlson's spying claim. He says, in other disturbing events. Let's go into this. It says here, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, on Wednesday called for a probe into the National Security Agency, the NSA, citing a disturbing trend that includes allegations of spying on Fox News host Tucker Carlson and the sidelining of Trump-appointed Michael Ellis as the agency's general counsel. Now, McCarthy said in a June 30th statement that he has observed a pattern of action in recent months on a part of the agency that he finds disturbing. He said this, earlier this year, I sent a letter to Secretary of Defense Austin expressing concern over the politicization of the agency, the NSA, through the sidelining of Michael Ellis as NSA general counsel. Now, McCarthy also added that he requested that Ellis, who was first placed on administrative leave and later resigned, be reinstated to his post. The California Republican, McCarthy, also reiterated his concern that Ellis's sidelining was the result of undue political influence, quote. And Ellis, who was appointed by President Donald Trump in the waning days of his presidency, was put on administrative leave the day President Joe Biden took office. Again, raising some questions on Biden places him on administrative leave. This official puts someone else into place, and that agency then begins acting in a very concerning manner, possibly spying on a journalist, with the intention, allegedly, according to Tucker Carlson, to use the information they're stealing, the information they're gathering, in an attempt to get him deplatformed. Now, in an April 16th resignation letter to NSA Director General Paul Nakasone, published by the Washington Post, Ellis wrote that he had been sidelined for nearly 3 months without any explanation or updates, and there is no sign that NSA will attempt to solve the issue. He said, "I therefore resign my position effective immediately." And McCarthy also accused the NSA of refusing to cooperate with the GOP, the Republican Party. Now, we'll have to see what comes of this. The NSA is denying the allegations, which, take it for what you will, frankly, because the FBI denied such allegations as well. They were spying on the Trump campaign. They're denying the allegations. We'll have to see what comes from it, folks, and also the reason they're being maybe using with this. Now, another story I'm going to go into tonight, talking about the critical race theory programs, because we talked a lot about this, folks. You might remember the interview we had up a while ago with Dr. Carol Swain. She had a fantastic interview. If you haven't watched it yet, we do have it up on Epoch TV. Carol Swain, CarolSwain, where she explained something very interesting, which is that critical race theory may violate two things: the Constitution under the 14th Amendment, because it discriminates, and it may also violate the Civil Rights Act, which again is against discrimination of people based on their racial ethnicity. White people being among a race in this world, folks. If you're white, you're part of a race. You may not have known this. Yeah. Dave Johnson, Josh, they're spying on you too. Hey, they're not going to get much. It's okay. All right. Let's go to what's happening with this, though, folks, because the things that Carol Swain talked about, that these programs may actually be unconstitutional, is actually coming to light now. And this is important because if it's determined that these programs are non-constitutional, that they violate the Constitution, and especially, folks, that they violate the Civil Rights Act, not only could they be deemed not only could you sue them, very likely, and probably win, but you could probably also get these things out of your school systems, right? You can challenge them, folks. They violate the 14th Amendment and they violate the Civil Rights Act. Let's talk about this. It says here, Watchdog, schools' critical race theory initiatives may violate the Constitution and state laws. It says here, a watchdog group recently obtained documents that showed training based on the quasi-Marxist critical race theory in K-12 public school appears to violate the U.S. Constitution's 14th Amendment and related state laws. Judicial Watch, which you may know about, obtained 111 pages of records from Wellesley Public Schools in Massachusetts, confirming that they use affinity spaces, which divide students and staff based on race, as a priority and objective of the school district's diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. Folks, didn't we get rid of this type of policy during the civil rights era, right? Dividing people up by their race. Let's get into what it says here. It says they also admitted they created 5 distinct segregated spaces, folks. Segregation, sound familiar? They've created 5 distinct segregated spaces under the narrative of getting rid of racism. Let's talk about it. It says the Wellesley School District Superintendent did not immediately return a request for comment about the report. The Wellesley School District's webpage, public notice about one of its equity events, equity, that's a keyword again, lists some of the affinity groups, African, Latinx, Asian, and Native American. They talk about newspeak, right? Remember, Spanish is a romantic language ending in an A or an O with most words and many words. O being masculine, A being feminine. They've removed that from the language, Latin X, right? Talking about newspeak. But continuing on this, right? It says, they talk about this as breathing life into liberation. Now, the school district's records include a document detailing the school district's Equity Strategic Plan 2020 to 2025, which includes a district equity by design plan that aims to have students feel heard, quote unquote, and seen, quote unquote. And the district says affinity spaces give those with a shared identity that opportunity. So you can be shared, you can be seen, and you can be heard only among people of your shared identity. Right? Now, the same district encourages students to report incidents of discrimination or any concerning pattern of biased behavior. So not just discrimination, folks, but if you have patterns in your behavior that may suggest that you're biased, even if you're not biased, you can be reported if you're a student in this school. And they can report that to any district staff member or a trusted adult, they claim. Now, reports may also be made anonymously online according to the policy, although it notes that anonymous reports are more difficult to investigate and respond to. Now, does that sound familiar, folks? It's interesting because both at the school level, at the corporate level, at the military level, the purges inside the military, and at the level of, again, well, these big tech platforms, Facebook, what it's rolling out right now, all seems to line up interestingly. But the interesting thing beyond all this, folks, is that these programs may actually violate the Constitution, some of them. Critical race theory, as we just discussed, may violate the 14th Amendment of the Constitution because it engages in segregation in many cases. If you believe that your school district or your children's school district is engaging in segregation, keep in mind that they may be violating the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And if they are demonizing people based on their racial ethnicity, which is the classical and real definition of racism, they may be violating the Civil Rights Act. So folks, keep this in mind when you make your arguments about these systems, because it's important to note, and you may be able to sue them. So folks, that said, again, I do these live, it's getting late, so we'll call it a night. I do these lives every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday. And I'll see you again this coming Sunday at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Happy early 4th of July for my American and also non-American friends. We can all celebrate together the birth of liberty, right? Folks, happy early 4th of July. Thank you all for being here. See you again this coming Sunday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And folks, again, we've been totally demonetizing this channel, but it really helps us if you do like and share this video. Also, if you really want to support us, please check out epochtv.com/crossroads. That's our uncensored platform and hopefully the future of video news, uncensored, folks. And again, we have a great feature coming up pretty soon, July 6th, America Rewritten. And I hope you really enjoy it. That said, folks, appreciate you all. Thanks for being here. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.